video I want to talk to you about something called secondary dominants. Now, these are a little bit tricky, but once you've got the concept, they can be used carefully and at specific times in your harmonizations to create another layer of interest. Now, I say they're tricky. They're not that tricky if you understand that a secondary dominant implies that there is indeed, in fact, a primary dominant. And the primary dominant is the dominant within the key that you are in. So if I was in C major, then my primary dominant is going to be 5, or G, all right? And my primary tonic, that is to say the tonic that I would expect in this key, is going to be the 1 chord, which would be C. And it has a 5-to-1 relationship. And within the key of C major, having a 5-to-1 relationship like that, no problem whatsoever. It doesn't really matter. Now, notice there are other chords within C major that would have a sort of a 5-to-1 connection in that they are a fifth apart. But they do not have a tonic-dominant relationship, because what makes tonic and dominant work is the fact that this is the 5 chord in the key, and it is relating to the 1 chord. It is a major chord relating to, in this case, a major chord, though of course if we were in C minor it would be the same, major chord relating to a minor chord. The point is a dominant tonic chord. It is also true, remember, that we can make this a 5-7 chord or a G7 chord, and that adds a greater power to the dominant to tonic relationship that we have. So we have a dominant and tonic relationship going on within the key, and this is the primary tonic dominant relationship, or the primary dominant, that is to say the first dominant, the dominant you find in the key. So what then do we mean by a secondary dominant? Well, this would occur when you have a temporary moment where you make another chord other than the tonic feel like the tonic. Again, this is probably better illustrated in real-world conditions than me trying to describe it. Let's say, for example, we're in the key of C major, and we have figured out that we have a chord C, and then immediately after that, suddenly we have a chord E7. Then we have a chord A minor, and then we have a chord F, and then we have a chord G, and then a chord C. If we were going to put Roman numerals to that chord progression, if we were going to try and figure out what that chord progression was, and we knew we were in C major, we would have no problem with most of those chords. We would say this is a 1 chord, we would say this is a 6 chord, this is a 4 chord, 5 chord, and a 1 chord. No problem with that, all right? However, this chord doesn't make sense. Now, if this chord said instead that it was E minor 7, well then we'd have no problem at all. E minor 7, we'd just say, oh, it's a 2-7 chord, and we'd be fine. The problem is, it's not E minor 7, it's E7. This chord suggests E, G, B, D, and specifically E, G sharp, B, D. This chord has a G sharp in it. It is outside of the key. It is therefore a chromatic chord. It is not a diatonic chord. If it was a diatonic chord, it would not have that sharp. But for this to be an E7 chord, if I have correctly identified that as an E7 chord, it must have E, G sharp, B, D. And initially we would look at that and we would be confused. We don't understand how we can have an E7 chord in a key of C major. It just doesn't make sense. It shouldn't exist. However, if we take another moment and we just glance at, is there a relationship going on at all between that chord and the chord that it moves to? Well, actually, if we look at these two chords, and if we said to ourselves, you know, let's forget that we're in C major for a moment, let's just look at those two chords and see if they have a connection. Well, indeed, if this were our 1 chord, A minor, then this would be in A minor, my 5 chord. E7 is my 5-7 going to 1 in A minor, right? If I'm in A minor, then my 5th scale degree is going to be E. And E would have my dominant chord on it. So if I weren't in C major at all, and I just said, okay, tell me what these two chords are in relation to one another in the key of A minor, you would say 5-7 to 1, no problem there, 5-7 to 1. The problem, of course, is we're not in A minor. we're in C major. And so the concept of a secondary dominant is that for just a moment, this chord has appeared in a key it should not appear in, to make this chord feel like it's a 1 chord, just for a moment. And then we slip right back into the key, we finish in the key, we have not changed key, we have not moved to another tonality. We're still in C, but for a moment we've made this 6th chord feel like a 1 chord. So we say to ourselves, this chord is not really then acting as it should in the key. It is instead acting for a moment like it is a dominant, like it is a 5 of the 6. Alright? For a moment it is a 5 to 1 in A minor, but we're not in A minor, and the chord A minor is a 6th chord. So this is a 5 of the 6th chord. And we use this concept to determine what we call secondary dominance. This is a secondary dominant. It's not the primary dominant. The primary dominant in this key is G. But secondarily, on another level, for a moment, we have a secondary dominant that is making another note of the chord, another chord within the key, another note of the key, another chord within the key, feel like tonic for a moment. So we have 5 of 6 creating a secondary dominant of the 6th chord. This same principle can be used with other chords, and always, I shouldn't say always, nearly always, when you have a secondary dominant, it's going to go to the chord you would expect to. The next chord is going to be its tonic for this temporary moment where it's making another chord feel like tonic. So, for example, you might have a situation like this, where we have a 1 chord. Let me write it up rather in chords, and we'll see what I mean. Here's another chord progression that I might come up with. Again, everything makes sense except for one of these chords. This chord here, no problem, it's a 1 chord. This one, question mark, shouldn't really exist. This one, 2 chord, no problem there. 5 chord, 1 chord. What do we do with this chord here? Seems strange, seems to not make sense, right? So we look at it and we say to ourselves, well, is there a relationship between these 2 chords? If I were in this key, would this chord make more sense? Well, indeed, if I were in D minor, then this chord does make sense as a 5-7 chord. So this is a 5 to 1 relationship. The problem is this isn't 1, it's 2. So this isn't a 5 of 1, but a 5 of 2, or 5-7 of 2, creating a secondary dominant that for a moment makes this 2 chord feel like a 1 chord. All right? Here's another example. With this one I'll end. Let's say we have this chord. Again, no problem really with 1, 5, 1. But we do have a problem with D7. We would expect our D-based chord in this key to be a D minor chord. So instead it's a D major minor 7, D, F sharp, A, C. Doesn't make sense initially, but if we look at it in context and we say to ourselves, is there a relationship between that chord and the chord next to it? If this was our 1, then indeed this would be my 5-7. In the key of G, D7 is my 5-7 chord. But we're not in the key of G, we're in the key of C, so this is not a 5 to 1, this is a 5-7 of the 5 chord, creating a secondary dominant, a moment where you feel like the 5 chord is in fact really tonic, but it doesn't last for long and you move on. So your job this week is to look for opportunities where you might have a regular diatonic chord and that you might be able to precede that chord with its dominant. If you were for a moment not in the key you are actually in, but instead you think to yourself, well, what if I was in this different key? What if I was in the key that is represented by the 4 chord, or the key that is represented by the 5 chord, or the 2 chord? What would its dominant be? And can I slip that chord in, staying primarily, in the end of the day, in the original key, but just for a moment giving a flavor or a taste of another key going on, a temporary or secondary dominant that is making another chord other than the tonic feel like a tonic for a moment. Play with that for a little bit. We'll look at some examples in class and see if we can solidify this concept.